my favorite time of the year. I get to preach the Halloween-themed sermon, and I think I've waited 30 years to hear that song in a sanctuary. My heart was just singing. This is actually the 30th anniversary of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and so it was particularly appropriate that we got to hear the This Is Halloween song. Thank you, Bob. We get to savor and enjoy the spookiness of the season. And this year, I decided in order to do that, to kind of get into the spirit, I was going to read up on the mythology of the doppelganger. And I also got to read some short stories featuring doppelgangers. And I even read a Stephen King novel about the concept. The Stephen King novel is called The Outsider, which has also been turned into a mini-series on HBO. I recommend it if you're into this sort of thing. You may not be, and that is okay too. I promise that even if you are not into these things that are especially spooky, even if you're not into this time of year, I think the doppelganger has something to teach us. It teaches us about ourselves, about our world. Sigmund Freud wrote a famous essay on the uncanny, and the word that was translated as uncanny in English was translated from unheimlich in German. In German, heimlich means homely. It means familiar. It means that which makes us comfortable and is recognizable to us. But the unfamiliar, but unheimlich means unhomely, unfamiliar. But not unfamiliar in the sense of I've never encountered this thing before. It's not unfamiliar in the sense of an alien race that we cannot possibly comprehend. Instead, it's exactly the opposite of that. Unheimlich is that which is so familiar that it provokes fear inside of us. It is so familiar that it twists into the unfamiliar. And this is what bridges me into talking about the doppelganger, which also happens to be another German word. The Germans are on a roll here this morning. The notion of the doppelganger is someone's spitting image, someone's clone, someone's identical other. And just as with the notion of the unheimlich, the doppelganger is not a fun thing to run into. In the original stories of the doppelganger, it almost always appears as omen. It heralds the ruin and destruction of the person that it is doubling. There is folk mythology around the doppelganger, which points to a possible origin story. Upon someone's death, it was thought that their soul would leave their body, and that soul would go and visit someone who was close to the deceased person. Often a friend or relative would see the doppelganger and would think that it is the actual person. But then they would find out that the person had died and could not possibly have come and visited them. In some cultures, these stories are still told today. People really do believe in this, and they have an undeniably hair-raising quality to them. Doppelgangers are not all terrifying, though. I think Anne's story got at one sense of a doppelganger, was not quite as terrifying. And my sister grew up loving the movies that featured Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen. There was a spate of these films featuring these twins following their success from the Full House sitcom. And these films often had a doppelganger theme, one that was utterly harmless and frequently annoying to older brothers. Here, the two girls would meet each other and realize that they looked identical. And then they would swap places. Good-spirited hilarity would ensue. And it is a reminder that the unfamiliar can again slip back into the familiar, losing its menacing quality. But it can also slip back easily into the sinister and the menacing. Other versions of that exact story, not featuring the Olsen twins, can get quite creepy. Novels and films with this theme discuss an imposter who slips in to take over someone's life. And here the family notices subtle differences. They notice that their loved one does not have the same memories, the same habits. They don't have the same ways of going about their day. However, the family member looks the same, lending itself to this feeling of the familiar that has twisted into the unfamiliar, the menacing, the sinister. The question underneath these stories is, how well do I know the ones that I love? And how well do they know me? In the 1995 film, The Net, which was released, I think, 2 years after the Nightmare Before Christmas, Sandra Bullock plays a computer programmer who is also a recluse. And she uncovers a conspiracy and decides to try to report it. But the people behind the conspiracy decide that they're going to try to stop her. And so they steal her identity. She finds all of her assets frozen, her car sold, and her home put up for sale. Someone in the digital world has stepped in, claiming to be her, and have taken over everything. Because of her reclusive nature, no one in her life can vouch for her. No one can identify her. And when she tries to convince others, no, I am really myself, they believe that she is the imposter. The film was strangely prescient in retrospect. 1995 would have seen the very beginnings of the internet. At that time, folks could hardly have imagined the degree to which scams and identity theft would blossom over the next 25 years. And so this film, which features the doppelganger theme, is strangely relevant today, surprisingly relevant today. Not, mind you, because of its actual depictions of the internet in 1995. I remember one scene where she's trying to log onto the net, and it takes about 15 minutes for her computer to boot up and actually get online. But the thought of the online doppelganger, the idea of some anonymous person behind a screen who has taken over my identity and harvested my data and seeks to impersonate me, that is something that more than a few of us are familiar with, unfortunately. Naomi Klein is a political journalist and intellectual. And for years, she has written about corporate greed, workers' movements, environmental destruction, climate change, and the efforts of real people who are trying to make a difference in these areas. Now, I have read her stuff since college. I really respect and admire her. And Evan and I got to see her speak back in 2018. She also spoke at the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly a couple of summers ago. Last month, when she came out with her new book, I was keen to pick it up. I was especially interested in its title, which was, can anybody guess? Doppelganger. The book follows a personal drama of hers. She is frequently confused with another writer, That person's name is Naomi Wolf. And Naomi Wolf began as a feminist intellectual and turned into a right-wing conspiracist. And much to Naomi Klein's dismay, people frequently mistake Naomi Wolf's ideas with hers. She gets people shouting at her at public events for things that she never said. She says it's a strange out-of-body experience. She is being mistaken for her double. Now, this would be an interesting story to tell at a cocktail party, but I was not particularly convinced that it would be enough to form the substance, the groundwork for an entire book. And in fact, it's not. But the author doesn't make the whole book about that. The author instead uses it as a jumping off point. She ends up becoming quite curious about her double, this person that she is often confused with. And so she decides to follow Naomi Wolf down the conspiracy rabbit hole. She starts reading everything that Wolf produces, listening to her on podcasts. And this includes tons of really nutty conspiracy theories about the government setting up concentration camps for vaccine refusers, vaccines causing female infertility and erectile dysfunction, and masks cognitively damaging children. Naomi Wolf is frequently interviewed by Steve Bannon, where she spouts off a lot of these conspiracy theories. Now, what started for Naomi Klein as a vanity project, a sort of personal obsession with the person that she is often confused with, what she calls the person that she calls the other Naomi, it turns into a deeper exploration of the world of conspiracies. And as those conspiracies have blossomed in recent years, it turns into a pretty deep exploration of an important part of our world and our political reality. She uses the theme of the doppelganger as a metaphor for what she's doing in exploring these conspiracy theories. She says that many of us have family members and friends who were once reasonable, who once held progressive positions on different social issues, or perhaps they were conservative, but still someone that you could sit down with and have a conversation with. Now, she says, for many of us, it's as if they have been kidnapped and replaced by their double. Such a double believes that the world is being run by a cabal of Satanists, that Democrats are eating children, that COVID vaccines are implanting microchips and causing erectile dysfunction. The list goes on and on. Klein calls this the fall into the mirror world. Now, Klein, again, I want to emphasize, she doesn't buy any of this stuff. She is not a conspiracist, but she wants to understand how these conspiracy theories blossom in our world. And one of the things that she says that I think is particularly relevant and interesting is that she does not laugh at or dismiss the people who spout the conspiracy theories. Instead, she says that that's the easy way out. The deeper invitation of people who have fallen into the mirror world is the invitation to take a long look at ourselves. She links this too with the literature of the doppelganger. Often when the doppelganger arrives, they're there not to tell us about someone else. They're there to reflect back to us some deeper truths about ourselves. They help us reflect on our identities and social positions if we allow them. A big part of the world of conspiracy theory is the relationship between skepticism and truth. And here, I think, is where the invitation lies. What is it that you are choosing to be skeptical about and why? What is the information that you are choosing to trust and why? Framing it in this way made me consider the ways that I am sometimes credulous. I am sometimes overly trusting. The pandemic was a good example of this. When the vaccines came out, I was so relieved to be able to get my shot and not feel fearful about going to the grocery store. I was so relieved that I chose not to question the fact that poorer countries did not have access to those vaccines. And that was not a supply chain issue, or at least it wasn't wholly a supply chain issue. In large part, it was a patent issue. Because of patent laws and corporate interests, Africa today has a vaccination rate of about 50% of the population. About 50% of the population, and they've usually only had one vaccine. And the fatalities reflect that truth. And that's the thing, right? Sometimes conspiracies are real. Sometimes corporate interests advocate for profits ahead of people's lives, and that is orchestrated. And sometimes we need to reevaluate what it is that we are trusting and why, and also what it is that we are choosing to be skeptical of and why. Now, this doesn't mean falling into the mirror world. It doesn't mean spinning crazy conspiracy theories that we all suddenly believe in and get each other really excited about. But it also means not being naive about the ways that wealth influences power. It means not being naive about the ways that capitalism does not have the best interests of human beings at heart. It means not being naive about all of the people who get left behind. Perhaps another way to ask the question is, if I were doubled in another place, another social location, another country, another race, another gender, another sexuality, another tax bracket, another life, how would I hope to be treated? And what is it that I can do now to bring about more justice and hope for others? In the Gospels, Jesus sums up his ethic in this way: in all things, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It is a sort of doppelganger ethic. It suggests that you should seek to see yourself again and again in the shoes of others, and then to seek to do what is right and good by them. I think that's a good place to be. I think that's a good place to start. And I think it's a good place for me to end. Happy Halloween.